Alright, so, not really sure how much storage space I have left on my phone, but, I wrote a thing, if I can find my device, there it is. I prefer to read the typed up versions, but, I wrote a whole, I wrote an analysis of, the 13th chapter of George Orwell's Burmese Days. And it's kind of, I guess it's, well, shit. I can't read that first then, if that's how that works. Alright, I'll read that one after this, because, yeah, I can't read that one without this. Okay. I'm trying to figure out how to do this correctly. Okay. So, this is an article, this is a thing I wrote called Might of the Moment. It's the fourth full part of Neurotic Nihilism. Alright, so, with that, one, might. Quote, like the crocodile, he strikes always at the weakest spot. Do crocodiles always strike at the weakest spot, doctor? Both men laughed. Unquote. George Orwell, Burmese Days. Contextually, the bit of dialogue spoken between Flory, an English colonial, and his native friend, the Dr. Verswamy, and George Orwell's detailed Burmese Days is a more lighthearted instance than the actual implications of the offhanded inquiry. Might as the momentary application, failure and setback is nonetheless always possible. You know, Challenger had its moment, then, like Icarus falling from flying too high, you know, crashed down like a tower onto avenues around. Which leads to the question, you know, is there any might in the moment of a sinking ship? You know, like, if it were true that a captain always went down with the wreck, you know, there'd be none of us left. You know, Napoleon entered Moscow to no avail, but he still made it farther than the later Charlie Chaplin impersonated Austrian painter. You know, in essence, this is the confusion of strength and might, you know, not innately being inequitable. It would, however, be counterintuitive to wholly view them as intrinsically inclusive at the same time. You know, might denotes strength, whereas strength is not might perpetual in and of itself. Continued strength perpetuates as a byproduct of might's flashes. To retentive evolution. This is the second part in this. Paradise Lost, while largely a work of John Milton's Autofellatio, stands to embark the delusion as Satan is depicted in the Promethean bastardization of Venus. We see the character depicted as today. You know, valor and power only two. In the end, wind up nothing but a shriveled serpent, not a triumphant traitor. You know, and it's funny how, in spite of this, you know, power philosophies and platitudes are drawn from that specific archetype. Like, there's so much more than Paradise Lost. Yet this shriveled snake at the end of it is this bastion that's supposed to be, you know, idealized. Like, God's gonna cut you down, yeah, sure, but, you know, maybe not to the point of your shriveled snake, you know. But that's getting ahead of myself. Quote, you say you want a revolution. Well, you know, we all want to change the world. You tell me that it's evolution. You say you got a real solution. Well, you know, we'd all love to see the plan. You ask me for a contribution. Well, you know, we're doing what we can. Don't you know it's gonna be all right? Unquote. The Beatles, Revolution 1. Quote, you said you wanted evolution. The ape was a great big hit. You say you want a revolution, man, and I'm saying that you're full of shit. Unquote. Marilyn Manson, Disposable Teens. Between 60 and up until mid 70s or so, the world glimpsed at what was probably. I gotta drink a bit real quick. Glimpsed at what the between 1960 up until the 1970s, the world glimpsed at what was probably the largest widespread adoption or adaptation into movements that prior seemed or in many cases were completely underground beforehand. Namely and known are the hippies, Black Panthers, and Weather Underground. In part given their hub in U.S. history, and also, as well as the latter mentioned, managing to somehow smuggle a bomb into the Pentagon. Most of the consensus in hindsight was this sort of false optimism of accomplishment. And most were too counterproductive in their pride to acknowledge or perceive it, leading to the inevitably and invariably harsher, more nihilistic next generation of counterculture, the art that kills aesthetic terrorist movement, Likewise, with much of the focus being on American soil, it tends to negate that in other Western nations, similar trends sprouted, and at that, it lacks much of a perspective that is more realistic than the superficialities of American pipe dreams. For example, the Dutch Provo movement was a short existing blip in the broad genre of 60s cliques of activists. Not terribly indistinguishable from most others, except the fact that, they did not adhere to a solid, grandiose view of success. To quote from their own literature, Provo realizes that it will lose in the end. Provo is an image, unquote. In essence, it's an idea, rather than a perpetual collected effort itself. The movement is an archetypal ideal, which is what people try to do with, the Milton's character of Satan, but as, evident, it's awkward in application, which leads to part 3. Awkwardly applying. Because ideas are interesting as they're ideas. Application is awkward. Assimilation and adaptation are both neurotic in their own right. Quote, "Are we demented or am I disturbed? The space that's in between insane and insecure. Oh, therapy, can you please fill the void? Am I retarded or am I just overjoyed?" Unquote. Green Day, Jesus of Suburbia. Prior to the production of an actualized Broadway spectacle, the album American Idiot was already described as a, quote, punk rock opera due to the nature of it being a concept record. Telling the story of disenchanted, disenfranchised naivety, which, ultimately concludes in the subsequent suicide of the St. Jimmy and and banal seclusion of what's-her-name. All that to say, the general idea of what I'm saying here is summed up with the Gandhi line, about being the change you wish to see, internal revolution in order for external. Personal is the only revolution which can actually be perceptual. That does not make it mighty, however, by any innate means, as it is so constant a tendency for humans to, quote, build it up just to burn it down, unquote. And no one, if it were so, would leave the psychoanalyst chair. Not even the analysts, in such a case, And then where would anyone be? Which, I guess, goes to part 4. Where would anyone be? So, part 4. Bullet. Probably, albeit speculatively, but intuitively, it's likely we'd all bite the bullet. And in the Church of Euthanasia, such would be an interpersonally personal revolution, their touted line being, quote, "Save the planet, kill yourself," unquote. It's equivalent to Christian sainthood, almost even if atheistically. Tax-exempt as an educational institution, Chris Korda's aesthetic terrorist post-human Dadaist church is a goldmine in the context of case studies in terror management theory. Ultimately, their view is the Earth grows increasingly in population when already substantially overrun by a cancer-like organism, which has enough awareness to ruin it not only for themselves, but every other ecosystem on the sphere for fellow and future inhabitants. Similar to Darth Treya's secret mission in Knights of the Old Republic 2, to completely sever every living entity's connection to the Force, the solution given by and in spite of surprisingly acknowledged fealty and biological impracticality of voluntary human depopulation. Intuitively, it's an unrealistic hypothesis. Even if an inevitable inheritance of extinction exists, given that suicide is ultimately the form of symbolic ego fulfillment in the mind of a caged creature, biology tends to override ideology in the end, with its imperative to blatant forms of instantaneous annihilation, as comforting as they may seem. Collectively unconscious mass suicide, isn't completely crazy though, but it's not a common denominator. The instances can be poignantly used, and while evident on many things, really seem to go to show groups of people whose psychology, like most anyone, is prone to pathos and wind up exiting to Hale-Bop like Heaven's Gate as a byproduct. With that, however, even then permeates the mortality salience diagnosed by terror management theory, wherein, quote, conceptions of the supernatural world were probably in place around 40,000 years ago, with the advent of what anthropologists call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, or the Creative Explosion. This era was marked by the simultaneous appearance of art, body adornments, burials, and elaborate grave goods in many different societies. The concurrent emergence of material manifestations of supernatural beliefs and extraordinary technological advances is consistent with the notion that the sophisticated cognitive capacities associated with consciousness could serve our ancestors well, but dressed in a supernatural universe in which death could be forestalled and ultimately transcended, unquote. According to the book Worm at the Core, further purporting the death desire is absurdly based on a denial of the event nonetheless, be it Jonestown in Guyana or a person jumping off a bridge, the ultimate differentiator is choices of beverage present or provided. Suicide is, in a way, a social contagion, though. An escapist egress based on the shortness of human lives concluded from illusory assumptions of characteristics. It's a revolution against the inevitably innate. Quote, when it comes to efforts to transcend death, not much has changed in the last 40,000 years. Many ingenious approaches to immortality have arisen. All serve the same purpose, to diminish existential dread by denying death is either inevitable or the end of one's existence. Which goes to part 5, which is self-esteem, synonym of ego. Quote, everybody wants to change the world, but no one wants to die, unquote. My Chemical Romance, na. Wisdom is limited to the understanding of amalgamated perceived experience. Might is the futile attempts at making that matter, because if our ideas don't matter, or have some intrinsic worth, surely neither do we. Quote, then I wonder how much more I can spend. Well, I guess I should just stick up for myself. But I really think it's better this way. The more you suffer, the more it shows you really care. Right? Yeah. I may be dumb, but I'm not a dweeb. I'm just a sucker with no self-esteem. Unquote. The Offspring, self-esteem. Explanations regarding the concept of mortality salience often prefer to substitute the simple yet vastly complex word of ego for the less self-aggrandizing perception of the two-term phrase of self-esteem. Self-esteem is a way of gauging neuroticism in regards to ego rather than a completely equivalent synonym. Which then brings to 6, application and awkwardness. Whether I'm more or less neurotic is unclear. What is it is a label and idea which is utilized as a way of broadly encompassing various queries about the human condition. It is a thought experiment for thought experiments, and lasts as long as the question in relation and to the experiences of being neurotically nihilistic do, if they ever should truly subside. Observed, not answered. Intuition, not default definition. The thesis encompassing neurotic nihilism, what's a good Nietzschean without neurotic nihilism? Neurotic meaning, according to the New Webster Medical Dictionary, quote, one who has a neurosis or a behavior suggesting one, and with that, neurosis implying, quote, a functional nervous or emotional disorder, less serious than a psychosis, marked by severe anxiety, depression, and the like, without any apparent physical origin, unquote. Nihilism from the Latin nihil, meaning, well, literally and metaphorically nothing, is prescribed somewhat contradictingly as the belief in nothing, whereas it, at least from my understanding, would be better defined as more of a neurotic agnosticism. And understanding myself as well as I can in the current present possible, I know that I embody the definition of a living neurosis walking nihilistically through existence. A synonym to this and more easily understood would be the phrase of, I'm mentally fucked. The body keeps the score. But as Anakin Skywalker said in the beginning scene of Revenge of the Sith, and later echoed by Rusty Cage for his family-friendly news song, this is where the fun begins. Manic, depressive, passively suicidal, or just listening to music. It's an experience which can be dissected and will, as a way to understand and evolve from neurosis, while simultaneously, unconsciously growing to it and with it each circumstance. I am skeptical to a redundantly reductive extent that it really ensures neuroticism, and it's not a blessing or a curse, nor is it too atypical or queer of a thing, even if in isolation it becomes or can get maniacally grandiose at times. In spite of that hell, to paraphrase Dostoevsky, it's preferable to the many masks employed by those mysterious mirroring entities of external consciousness. Which leads me to the seventh part and final part. A short history of decay and a fucked brain. Quote, history confirms skepticism, yet it is and lives only by trampling over it. No event arises out of doubt, but all considerations of events lead to it and justify it, unquote. And anti-philosopher Emile Cioran explained in his potent pill of a book, A Short History of Decay. Cioran's book is akin to Nietzsche's Human All Too Human, but with a more invocative, as an invocation like a mystical rite, quality that likens it more to the more poetic polemics found in the infamous Ragnar Redbeard's tome Might Is Right. Less like the latter, it's not a lyrical lambast, it's a deconstructing diatribe in the same lineage as those two. But unlike the other two, it's not attempting as much sagedom in its prose, more so the banal comedic horror of the idea that nothing truly matters at the end of it all. Which leads to that if I burned all my writings, destroyed all recordings I've ever made, disappearing to whatever end that could mean, it would be all too easy to just, it would be so fucking easy to just grab this book, sign my name in the back of it, like XOXO Claudia, and then just fuck off for the rest of time. It would be easy to have it serve as a posthumous note. Not so much an argument, not a life sentence, but a death dream for none of it, for nothing. But, egotistically, those aren't my words, or my works, and introspective inspiration they may have, they are mere tools made by other fools. So, I guess with that, I close with the poem. Ironic, idiotic, septic symphony. Not pity, just a vibrating scream. Something new to mean. Misery is exclusive to me. Sleuthing is suffering. Traveling ends in cadaver flaking, skin flaking. In the dirt and the dust, it's an ordinary loss. Ethos imitation, all a mess, longing. Serotonin blows and superstition sows. Why even watch a show? Days go and worms only grow. 19 out of 25 years and an imagined 100 to go. Solipsistic, it's near impossible to tell a friend from foe. Everything I think I know is just static on the radio. And with that,